Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck tech number 125 and it's titled Call to Glory Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from Scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card is going to look a little bit familiar because it is actually Call to Glory. And no, you didn't accidentally go back in time. I do know that this was our random card last week as well, but I do have a very good reason for doing the same card 2 weeks in a row. And that is that the deck you're going to see is completely different from the deck that we saw last week. Because when I first started building around Call to Glory, I had two main ideas in mind. And so I figured what I would do is I would build a deck for both of those ideas and then see which one I liked more and build a video around that. However, once I got to that point and I had built both decks, I really couldn't bring myself to decide between the two. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to make a video on both of them with a little bit of support from my Discord channel. I had some people saying, yeah, you should probably make both. So that's what we're doing. Last week, when we did Call to Glory, it was all about Samurai, because on Call to Glory, which is 1 and a white, for an instant, says untap all creatures you control, Samurai you control get +1/+1 until the end of turn. You might notice there are two sentences on Call to Glory. Last week, we built around the Samurai you control get +1/+1 until the end of turn. This week, we are building around the untap all creatures you control. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our commander and see the different route that we're taking. Now, I will be perfectly honest, we are still in the Boros colors. I decided to keep it the same color combination. So last week, it was red and white Samurai. This week, it is red and white, but with Captain Rex Nebula. So Captain Rex Nebula is 1 red-white for a 2/2 legendary creature, human pilot employee. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target non-land permanent you control becomes a vehicle artifact until the end of turn. Its base power and toughness are each equal to its mana value. It has Crew 2 and Crash Land. Whenever this vehicle deals damage, roll a 6-sided die. If the result is equal to this vehicle's mana value, it deals that much damage to any target, then sacrifice this vehicle. That is a lot of words to essentially say that we're turning one of our non-land permanents into a vehicle at the start of our combat, and if it deals damage, we could have to sacrifice it. So obviously you can kind of tell we're playing around with some non-permanent, or I suppose non-land permanent. They are still going to be permanents, but non-land permanents that are going to be, hopefully, vehicles and then doing some other things with it. So with all of that being said, let's take a look at some of our themes for this deck and figure out what exactly we're doing and how it's different from the deck we built last week. So first off, like I've already mentioned, we are building around an untap theme. So we have a lot of cards in here like To Arms, which is 1 and a white for an instant that just says untap all creatures you control, draw a card. So we want to make sure that we are taking advantage of Call to Glory's ability to untap our creatures. And then the real question is, why would we want to be untapping our creatures? Because, for our second theme, we have creatures that specifically do things when they are either tapped or untapped. So a great example of that is Scaretiller, which is, of course, the Pauper EDH All-Star. 4 mana for an artifact creature Scarecrow. It's a 1/4 that says whenever Scaretiller becomes tapped, choose 1. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, or return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this is a great ramp piece considering we're in Boros and aren't going to have a ton of land ramp otherwise. And of course we have other creatures that also care about being tapped and care about being untapped. But you might notice Scaretiller does not actually tap itself, which means that if we want to tap it, we would have to go into combat, attack, turn it sideways, or we can use our third theme of the deck, which is vehicles. Since Captain Rex Nebula cares about vehicles, it only makes sense that we fill the deck up with vehicles as it is. So we also have Surge Hacker Mech, which is 4 mana for a 5/5 vehicle. It's got Menace. When Surge Hacker Mech enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls, then crew for 4. So we want to have as many vehicles as possible, and Captain Rex Nebula gives us just an additional one with his own ability coming into play. But this gives us a free way to tap our creatures, because Surge Hacker Mech has a crew cost of 4, which means that we have to tap a number of creatures with power 4 or greater to turn it into a creature. If we have, say, 10 creatures on board, and they all have 1 power, we can still use all 10 of them to crew the Surge Hacker Mech. We don't have to tap exactly 4 power, we can tap more than that. So we can use our entire board to tap at any given time, then use something like 2 arms to completely untap them and get some additional value. That also means that whenever we are tapping Scaretiller to crew the mech, we are using his ability that specifically says when he becomes tapped, not when he attacks, so we can really take advantage of tapping and untapping our creatures, knowing that no matter what we're doing, we're also leaving a bunch of vehicles behind, so if for some reason our opponents do, say, wipe the board or decide to block a bunch of stuff in combat, we still have a lot of creatures kind of just waiting in the reserves and waiting to come in and hopefully round up the game. So that is our themes for the deck. The next thing that I want to do is take a look at some of our key cards. These are the cards that synergize very well with what we're doing, and of course, if they don't push us necessarily to a victory, they help us put ourselves in a position where we could win the game. So the first card that I want to highlight is Wildfire Awakener. And Wildfire Awakener is X1 red white for a 3/2 human wizard. It has Convoke, so there's another way we can tap our creatures because we can tap them to cast this spell. And when Wildfire Awakener enters the battlefield, create X1/1 red elemental creature tokens with, whenever this creature becomes tapped, it deals 1 damage to target player. That is perfect for what we're trying to do, because now, even if X is just, say, 3, so we spend 6 mana total, plus maybe some Convoke in there, we make 3 1/1 elementals that every time they get tapped, they do a damage to a player. If there's 3 of them, that's essentially a lightning bolt to an opponent's face every single turn, plus more if we're able to untap our stuff along the way, because we can definitely use those elementals to crew up some vehicles. So Wildfire Awakener, perfect for what we want to be doing, fills up the board with creatures that all care about being tapped, and is pretty easy to cast with our other creatures that also want to be tapped. So Wildfire Awakener is perfect for this deck. Our next key card plays a little bit more into our vehicle sub-theme, and that one is Peace Walker Colossus. Peace Walker Colossus is 3 mana for a 6/6 vehicle, 1 and a white. Another target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until the end of turn, and crew 4. So once our opponents kind of start to catch on to what we're doing, there's a good chance that there'll be some board wipes involved. They're going to try to keep some of our creatures off the battlefield, and we might get to a situation where we have a ton of vehicles and nothing to actually crew the vehicles with. That is where Peace Walker Colossus comes into play, because for just 2 mana, we can turn any of our vehicles into an artifact creature. And as soon as we're capable of doing that, we don't care if our opponents board wipe. We don't care if our opponents kill all of our creatures, because we're always going to have a backup plan, and our opponents are going to have to worry about us just swarming the board with a bunch of vehicles and then winning the game that way. And then finally, this leads us to our last key card, which is Drum Bellower. If we care about untapping all of our creatures, it only makes sense that we would care about untapping them every single turn. So Drum Bellower is 2 and a white for a 2/1 spirit, has flying, and just says untap all creatures you control during each other player's untap step. So now we can, on our turn, use all of the elementals that we made with Wildfire Awakener, say again 3, just to make our lives simple, tap them to crew up a vehicle, then we can untap them on our next opponent's turn, tap them again, crew up a vehicle, go to the next player's turn, untap them, tap them again, and we can go all the way around the table. And if we have, like I said, just 3 elementals, we're doing 3 damage to an opponent every single turn. That's a total of 12 damage going around the table just once. that really adds up very, very quickly, and that's just bare minimum of what we can be doing, because we also have Scare Tiller, we have other creatures that care about tapping and untapping, maybe doing damage, maybe giving us some sort of value in card draw, things like that. So Drum Bellower untapping everything every single turn is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Now, it is worth mentioning, though, that our vehicles will stop being creatures once we pass to an opponent's turn. So when Drum Bellower triggers in the beginning of our opponent's untap step, we don't actually get to untap our vehicles because they're no longer creatures, and we don't really have a chance to crew them before that happens because our creatures are still tapped. So that's a little bit awkward, and it is worth mentioning, though, that that is something we can do. So those are our key cards, and the next thing I want to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck. These are some cards that synergize very well together, can create a ton of value, and in some cases can push us toward a victory, and sometimes are honestly just cards that I really like and I kind of want to show off. So our first cool interaction is between Village Bellringer and Fellhide Spirit Binder. So Village Bellringer is 2 and a white for a 1/4 human scout, has flash. When Village Bellringer enters the battlefield, untap all creatures you control. Another untap effect, very powerful on its own, plus it gives us a body, which is great. But if we combine that with Fellhide Spirit Binder, it becomes even better, because Fellhide Spirit Binder is 3 and a red for a 3/4 Minotaur Shaman, has Inspired, so whenever Fellhide Spirit Binder becomes untapped, you may pay 1 and a red. If you do, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of another target creature, except it's an enchantment in addition to its other types. It gains haste, exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So the way that this works is if we have Fellhide Spirit Binder, we cast Village Bellringer to untap all of our creatures, we can then tap the Spirit Binder, crew up a vehicle, or do something else with it. We do have some other effects that tap our creatures for us. Village Bellringer enters, untaps the Spirit Binder. We can then pay 2 mana to make a copy of the Village Bellringer. With the untap trigger on the stack, we can then tap all of our creatures again. Village Bellringer enters, untaps all our creatures, then Spirit Binder's untapped again, we can pay 2, and we can repeat this process as long as we have 2 mana to pay. And as long as we have some creatures that can tap for mana, which we do, there are some vehicles in here that can tap for mana, some other creatures that can make mana in certain other ways, there is a possibility that this can literally go infinite, and then we just have an infinite amount of Village Bellringers that now have haste and can attack. That's not super likely because I specifically tried not to build a ton of infinite combos in here, but it's not impossible. So that is something to be aware of, and even if you don't go infinite with it and you still just say do it 3-4 times, that's still going to be pretty impressive because all of our creatures that want to tap and untap have now done that about 3 or 4 times. So that's a very cool interaction and definitely worth considering when you're putting this deck together. Our next cool interaction, though, is going to look a little bit different, but I do want to highlight another way we can tap our creatures other than just using vehicles. So our next cool interaction is going to involve Kyrene Negotiations and Masako the Humorless. So Kyrene Negotiations is 2 red for an enchantment. This is tap an untapped creature you control. Kyrene Negotiations deals 1 damage to target player. Then we have Masako the Humorless, which is 2 and a white for a 2/1 legendary creature human advisor. You may play Masako the Humorless anytime you could play an instant, and tapped creatures you control may block as though they were untapped. So we could put any other vehicle or any other tapping shenanigans in here in place of negotiations, but I did want to highlight exactly what it was because this is another way we can actually end the game if we get to the point where we have a ton of untap abilities, because just tapping our creatures to do 1 damage to a player doesn't sound like much, but if we have just 5 creatures on board and we can untap, say, 3 times, we're doing between 15 and 20 damage just with those 5 creatures. That also means that we're going to be mostly unprotected when it comes to combat. And that is where Masako is going to come in, because now all of our tapped creatures can block as though they weren't tapped. And that's going to give us a bit of a surprise factor. Maybe our opponents know about Masako, maybe they don't. They attack into us because they're like, oh, you can't block, we've got a bunch of attackers. And then all of a sudden we flash in Masako, do a ton of damage to their attacking creatures, maybe kill off their entire board, and then we still have some of our creatures, hopefully, to be able to defend the next turn. So Masako is incredibly important in this deck because even if we don't have an untap ability, Masako still protects us in combat as though we did. And once our opponents see a couple of effects like this, they're really going to start to question whether or not it's worth attacking into us because they're never going to know if we actually have a way to protect our board or not. So a very cool interaction that I wanted to highlight, and also I just wanted to highlight both of these cards because I think they're super cool and they do a great job in this deck. So with all of that being said, the last thing we've got to do for our actual deck tech is take a look at the price of this deck. And this week we came in at $63.30. And a good portion of that price actually comes from Halo Fountain, which is $5.62. So if you want to trim the price down below $60, you could cut Halo Fountain from the deck. In fact, if you want to trim it down below $50, you could cut Halo Fountain and Masako, who we just talked about, and you'd get a sub $50 deck. But if you want another way to win the game that is beyond just the damage, whether it's pinging or combat damage, Halo Fountain is the card for that, because it is 2 and a white for an artifact. You could pay a white, tap it, and untap a tapped creature you control, make a 1/1 citizen, pay 2 white, tap it, untap 2 tapped creatures you control, draw a card, or pay 5 white, tap it, untap 15 tapped creatures you control, you win the game. Every single one of these abilities is very important for what this deck is trying to do. Making more creatures is great because that means we have more bodies to crew everything up. Untapping them to draw cards is great. Every deck needs card draw. And then, of course, winning the game is also great because, it's just winning the game. So Halo Fountain, really good in this deck, especially because we can use it to untap our creatures and then still get value from them. So Halo Fountain is a great include in the deck, but like I said earlier, if you do need to trim it for budget purposes, that is completely fair. Now, on the other hand, maybe you're looking for cards to include that I didn't, that might be a little bit out of the budget and or just improve the deck beyond what I really wanted to do. So I do have a suggestion for you there. Now, normally when I say out of budget, I do mean that putting it into the deck would push the price of the deck to over $100. However, in this case, because that would have to be about a $40 card, and I'm not a big fan of suggesting staple cards that would be $40+ things like Smothering Tide, yeah, put it in if you've got it, but I don't want to suggest it because that's kind of lame. This card wouldn't push us over the $100 budget limit, but I didn't include it just kind of for power level reasons. It was my own personal choice. If you disagree with me in this case, let me know in the comments. But the out of budget suggestion that I would give you this week is actually Darksteel Forge. So it is just under that $40 limit that I was talking about. It's $34.82, but it is a massive 9 mana for an artifact that simply says artifacts you control have indestructible. Now, obviously, since we're filling up our board with artifacts in vehicles, that becomes incredibly powerful because now we can attack and block with our vehicles, and there's nothing our opponents can do that's going to get them off of the battlefield. Well, other than exiling them, of course, but they won't die in combat, at least as far as I'm aware. So Darksteel Forge is really going to be efficient in that capacity, but like I said, it's incredibly expensive, $34. So if you have one laying around and would include it in this deck, or you don't mind spending the money on it to go and get one, the card that I would recommend swapping out for it is Gleam of Resistance. And Gleam of Resistance, when I first put it in here, it seemed great because of the utility. It's 4 and a white for an instant. Creatures you control get +1/+2 until end of turn. Untap those creatures, and basic land cycling for 1 and a white. Now, like I said, originally the utility felt really good. We get the untap, plus we can basic land cycle it early in the game if we don't need it. But after playtesting it a few times, it really doesn't do what I want it to do, because 5 mana to untap is just an unreasonable amount of mana when most of our other untap effects are 2 to 3 mana. We don't want to be holding up 5 mana if we can avoid it. We want to be playing things on our turn to advance our board state. And the basic land cycling is nice, But if I'm being perfectly honest, if that's the only thing we're using it for, then we might honestly be better off just replacing it with a basic land. So if that's the case, then it's probably not a card that should make the final cut of the deck. So I do think that if you wanted to swap it out for Darksteel Forge, that would probably improve it pretty well. Other than that, it's not a terrible card to leave in. Again, because of the utility, I know I just kind of talked down on it, but it could possibly do something late game for the 5 mana and early game for the land cycling. So if you want to keep it in, by all means, give it a shot. And if you want to replace it with Darksteel Forge, then of course, by all means, give that a shot as well. But that is it for our deck tech, and the next thing we're going to have to do is take a look at how this deck performs in a game. However, before we get to that, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel and reach out to us if that's something you're interested in doing. So first up, you can find us over on Twitter at 13POYNZ, Reddit u/POYNZ13, email dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. Those are all great ways to reach out to us if you ever have any questions, if you want to suggest cards to be made into decks for this channel, because I am always happy to read the suggestions, and I do my best to get to all of them as much as I can. And if you're interested in supporting us a little bit more directly, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, and you can also become a channel member right here on YouTube. I know that I have the whole URL right there on the screen, but you can also find it in the description of the video down below as well. So if you are interested in either of those two things, you can join our 10 amazing patrons and channel members listed below, such as William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Calvin Schmidt, Eric Way, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Devin Purser, Tyler Esme, and Sven von Nimwegen. So to the 10 of you, thank you all so much for all of your support. I genuinely do appreciate it. I'm always very happy to see your names pop up. And if you would like your name down there as well, you can check out Patreon and the channel memberships. And once you're there, you get access to a ton of great benefits. Things like the deck lists an entire week early, where you're able to kind of check out what's going on, see what's happening in the deck, and also give me some feedback before it's fully published. You'll get access to a Discord channel where you can help brew up some of the decks and also participate in some of the games. So if you're interested in being in any of the games on this channel, you can go ahead and check that out. You'll also get access to the unedited gameplay videos, so you can hear the players talking, laughing, having a good time, rather than just my own narration over a shortened version of it. You'll also get a card sent to you every single month as a thank you for all of your support. It will be one of the random cards that we've built around. So, for example, this past month, the cards that are going to be going out are either going to be Grathama, Thromach, Call to Glory, or a fourth one that I am completely forgetting, but I'm sure someone will let me know in the comments. So all those will be getting sent out here very soon. And finally, the most important part, or at least in my opinion, what I think is the most important part, is the fact that I will give you my guarantee that any suggestions you make to be turned into decks for this channel will be turned into decks at some point. I will, of course, do my best to get to everyone's suggestions regardless of whether you are a patron channel member or not. You can send them to me on Twitter, Reddit, email, post them in the comments, wherever you can. I will try to get to all of them, but I can't promise that I will get to them in the same way that I can for my patrons and channel members. So I think I've done enough rambling about how you can support the channel, although of course I do have to throw in the always popular, if you are interested, you can always just like and subscribe. That does help out quite a bit. All right, now I'm done. Let's move on to the actual gameplay. And for this game, we are joined by 3 opponents, and it's a brand new, unique group of opponents, at least from what it normally is. Because this time, this game has actually already happened. It happened over on LionX's channel, who is going to be joining us playing Rivaz of the Claw, and we are also joined by Lunchbox playing Joda the Unifier, and Angel playing Olivia Crimson Bride. So Lion is playing his Rivaz deck. This is, of course, a dragon deck, so he wants to be putting a bunch of dragons into the graveyard, wants to be reanimating them, and just kind of doing dragon things in non-traditional colors. So I'm very excited to see how this goes. I've never seen a Rivaz of the Claw deck, so I think that it's going to be pretty impressive. Next up, Lunchbox and their Jodify the Unifier deck. I imagine that this is kind of your stereotypical legendary deck. Joda is pretty terrifying and has a way of just kind of popping off out of nowhere, and I'm sure Lunchbox is very aware of that, so I'm sure they're prepared to protect their commander, but we will see how it goes. And then finally we have Angel playing Olivia Crimson Bride, and I think out of all of these, even though I do know the power of dragons and of Joda, I think Olivia is the one that I'm the most concerned about, particularly because my wife also plays an Olivia deck, and I have been crushed by that deck a number of times. So I know the power that Olivia can bring to the table by just reanimating a bunch of vampires, putting them into play from the graveyard, and all of a sudden swinging for a lot more damage than you expect, especially with some other synergies thrown in. So I think that's the one to watch out for. Again, as always, if you think I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear which of these decks you think would be the most concerning for our deck to fight against. But I think without any further ado, let's jump into this game, see how we do, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Angel goes first, followed by Lion, myself, and then Lunchbox. On Angel's first turn, she plays a Smoldering Marsh. Lion plays a Haunted Ridge. I play a Plains. Lunch plays a Ziatora's Proving Ground. Angel plays a Mountain. Lion plays a Swamp, then casts Dragon Tempest, giving all his flying creatures haste and doing damage to any target equal to the number of dragons he controls whenever a dragon enters under his control. I play a Mountain and cast Mech Titan Core, which has a crew of 2. Lunch plays a Godless Shrine untapped, paying 2 life, then casts Arcane Signet. Angel plays a Swamp, then casts Anji Falconwrath, which can tap to discard a card and draw a card, untapping herself if the discarded card has Madness. Thanks to haste, Angel is able to immediately tap Anji to discard a card and draw a card. Lion plays a Mountain, then casts Dragon's Horde, which gets a gold counter whenever a dragon enters under his control, and allows him to tap it to remove a gold counter to draw a card. I play a Plains and cast Cultivator's Caravan, which has a crew cost of 3. Lunch plays Xander's Lounge, then casts Kodama's Reach, searching their library for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into their hand. Angel plays a Mountain, then activates Anji, discarding a card and drawing a card before passing. Lion plays a Swamp, then casts Flame Shadow Conjuring, letting him pay a red mana when a creature enters under his control to make a token copy of it that is sacrificed at the end of turn. I play a Plains and cast my commander, Captain Rex Nebula, allowing me, when I move to combat, to turn a non-land permanent into a vehicle with power and toughness equal to its mana value and crew 2 until the end of turn. The vehicle also makes me roll a d6 when it deals combat damage, being sacrificed if the rolled number is equal to its mana value, doing that much damage to any target. For this turn I choose Mech Titan Core, crewing it with the captain and attacking Lion for 2, rolling a 6 on the d6 so it's not sacrificed. Lunch plays a Forest and casts their commander Joda the Unifier, giving all their legendary creatures +X/+X, where X is the number of other legends they control, also allowing them to reveal cards from their library whenever they cast a legendary spell, casting the first legendary spell they reveal with lesser mana value for free. Angel plays a Swamp and casts Animate Dead, enchanting Falconwrath Forebear, returning it to the battlefield, giving it -1/-0. Notably, it also creates a blood token when it deals combat damage to an opponent. Then she attacks Lunch for 1 with Anji. Lion plays a Mountain and casts Scourge of Valkus, putting a counter on Dragon's Horde, paying 1 to create a token copy of it. This triggers both copies plus the Dragon Tempest, doing 2 damage to any target 4 separate times. This ends up with Joda taking 6 damage and Falconwrath Forebear taking 2, killing both creatures. Once that's resolved, Lion attacks Angel and I both for 4 with the Scourges. On my turn I play a Buried Ruin and cast Gideon Martial Paragon, then crew Mech Titan Core with Captain Rex Nebula, activate Gideon's +2 ability, untapping all my creatures and giving them +1/+1 until the end of turn. This lets me also use the captain to crew Cultivator's Caravan. Then when I move to combat, I turn Gideon into a vehicle and attack Lunch for 2 and Lion for 5 with my crewed vehicles. On Lunch's turn, they play a Pillar of the Pair runes and then recast their commander, Joda. Angel casts Feed the Swarm, destroying Flame Shadow Conjuring and losing 4 life since it has mana value of 4. Then she casts Faithless Looting, drawing 2 cards and discarding 2 cards. After that she plays a Swamp, then moves to combat and attacks me for 1 with Anji. Lion removes a gold counter from Dragon's Hoard to draw a card, then plays a Mountain and casts Phyrexian Arena, drawing a card and losing a life in his upkeep. Then he attacks Angel with the Scourge, activating its ability to give itself +1/+0, so she takes a total of 5 damage. On my turn, I cast Renegade Wheelsmith, which, whenever it becomes tapped, makes a creature unable to block until the end of turn. Then I use the Wheelsmith and the Captain to crew the Mech Titan Core and Cultivator's Caravan, preventing Joda from blocking this turn. Moving to combat, I turn Gideon into a vehicle, but don't crew him. I do, though, attack Lunch for 5 and Lion for 2. Then, in my second main phase, I activate Gideon's +2 ability to untap all of my creatures and give them +1/+1 until the end of turn. I also play a Boros Garrison, returning a Plains to my hand. Lunch plays a Forest, then casts Atraxa Praetor's Voice, which cascades into Elis Il Core, allowing Lunch to gain a life when a creature enters under their control, and makes Lunch's opponents lose a life whenever a creature dies under Lunch's control. After that, they cast Tamiyo, Completed Sage, paying 2 life so that she enters with 2 fewer loyalty counters, cascading into Kari Zev's Skyship Raider, gaining a life. This all allows Lunch to move to combat and attack Lion with Joda for 10 total damage. Before the damage though, Lion casts Terminate, destroying Joda, taking no combat damage, but Elis does make each of Lunch's opponents lose a life. Then in Lunch's second main phase, they activate Tamiyo's +1 ability, tapping Scourge of Valkus and preventing it from untapping in Lion's next untapped step. Finally, in their end step, Atraxa triggers, proliferating the counters on Tamiyo. Angel plays a Canyon Slough, then casts her commander Olivia Crimson Bride, and since she has haste, Angel attacks me with Olivia for 3, triggering her commander and returning Anji Maid of Dishonor from her graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking Lion for 4, exiling it if she ever doesn't control a legendary vampire. Anji also creates a blood token when she or another vampire enters under Angel's control, letting her sacrifice a blood to make each opponent lose 2 life while she gains 2 life. In Lion's upkeep, he draws an additional card and loses a life, plays a Reliquary Tower, gaining no maximum hand size, casts Vengeful Ancestor, putting a counter on Dragon's Hoard and goading Maid of Dishonor, also making any goaded creature do 1 damage to its controller when it attacks. Then, Lion does 2 damage twice when it enters, doing 4 to Atraxa, killing her and making each of Lunch's opponents lose a life. Once that's resolved, Lion casts Cursed Mirror, entering as a copy of Vengeful Ancestor, goading Olivia and doing 6 damage to Tamiyo, killing the Planeswalker. He then moves to combat and attacks Gideon for 3 with the copy of the Ancestor, goading Elis on attacks. On my turn, I play a Plains and cast Dermotaxi, exiling Atraxa from Lunch's graveyard and allowing me to tap 2 creatures to turn Dermotaxi into a copy of the exiled card until the end of turn. I then use the Captain and Wheelsmith to crew Mech Titan Core and Cultivator's Caravan, preventing Kari Zev from blocking this turn. When I move to combat, Captain Rex makes Dermotaxi a vehicle, but I don't crew it. I then attack Lunch for 2 and Lion for 5. In my second main phase, I activate Gideon's +2 ability to untap all of my creatures and give them +1/+1 until the end of turn. Lunch plays a Rogrin Triome, then attacks Angel for 2 with Elis, taking 1 damage on attacks thanks to the Vengeful Ancestor. Then Angel blocks with Anji Falconwrath, killing the vampire. On Angel's turn, she moves straight to combat, attacking Lunch for 3 with Olivia and me for 4 with Anji. This does 2 damage to Angel since they were both goaded, and also returns Falcon Wrath Forebear from her graveyard to the battlefield, attacking Lion for 3, making a blood token. Before the blocks, I crew Cultivator's Caravan, then Lion blocks the Forebear, killing it, I block Anji, killing her, and Lunch takes 3 from Olivia. Before Anji dies, Angel sacrifices a blood token to make each opponent lose a life, while she gains 2 life. At the end of turn, Lion removes a counter from Dragon's Horde to draw a card. Then, in his upkeep, Lion draws an additional card and loses a life. He then plays a Swamp and casts Entomb, searching his library for a card, in this case Hellkite Tyrant, putting it into his graveyard. He then casts Patriarch's Bidding, letting each player name a creature type, and returning all creatures of the chosen types from the graveyard to their owner's battlefield. Since Lunch and I don't have creatures in our graveyards, the only relevant named types are Dragon and Vampire, letting Lion return Hellkite Tyrant to play, while Angel returns both Anji's and Falcon Wrath Forebear. This results in Angel making a blood token, Lion putting a counter on Dragon's Horde, doing 3 damage to both Anji Falcon Wrath and Falcon Wrath Forebear, re-killing both of the vampires. Before that finally resolves though, Angel taps Anji to discard a card and draw a card. Then, once that has all resolved, Lion attacks me for 6 with Hellkite Tyrant, Lunch for 3 with Vengeful Ancestor, goading the Maid of Dishonor, and Angel for 4 with the Scourge. Before blocks, I cast To Arms, untapping all of my creatures and drawing a card. While this doesn't save me, it does let me turn Dermotaxi into a copy of Atraxa, blocking Hellkite Tyrant. Angel still has a response before damage though, casting Chaos Warp to shuffle Scourge of Valkis back into Lion's library, letting him reveal the top card, putting it into play if it's a permanent, which it is, letting Lion put a Dragon Mage into play, putting another counter on Dragon's Horde and doing 3 damage to Renegade Wheelsmith, killing it. Then, damage happens with Lunch taking 3, Hellkite and Atraxa both dying, but the Hellkite does still trample over for 2, so Lion gains control of all my artifacts. Then, in his second main phase, he casts his commander Rivaz of the Claw, letting him cast a dragon from his graveyard once a turn. On my turn, I play a mountain and cast Reaver Titan, which has a crew cost of 4. I then activate Gideon's Zero ability, turning him into a 5/5 creature with Indestructible and preventing all combat damage that would be dealt to him. After that, I move to combat, turning Gideon into a vehicle as well. This lets me crew my Gideon with Captain Rex Nebula and attack Lion for 5. Before blocks, Lion uses Rivaz to crew Mech Titan Core, using it to block Gideon, killing the Mech Titan. Then I roll a 5 on a d6 and my Gideon Planeswalker creature car crash lands, getting sacrificed and doing 5 damage to Rivaz, killing Lion's commander. Lunch casts Questing Beast, gaining a life, then casts Hero's Blade, and attacks me for 4 with Questing Beast since it has haste. At the end of turn, Angel sacrifices a blood token to make each opponent lose 2 life, while she gains 2 life. Then, on Angel's turn, she casts Buried Alive, searching her library for 3 creatures, putting them into her graveyard, getting Master of Cruelties, Sheoldred the Apocalypse, and Malakir Bloodwitch. She then attacks Lunch for 4 with Anji, taking a damage, and me for 3 with Olivia, triggering her commander, returning Master of Cruelties from her graveyard, also tapped and attacking me. This means Master of Cruelties is unblocked, putting me to only 1 life with its ability, then Olivia hits me for 3, knocking me out of the game. In Lion's upkeep, he draws an additional card and loses a life, then activates Dragon's Horde to draw another card. After that, he casts Sign in Blood, drawing yet 2 more cards and losing 2 life. Once that's resolved, he plays a Luxury Suite and casts Crux of Fate, destroying all non-dragon creatures. Lunch, though, has the response, casting Arcane Denial to counter the board wipe, letting themselves draw a card in the next upkeep, while Lion gets to draw 2. Once that's resolved, Lion plays a Swamp, which unfortunately he couldn't do as he's already played a land this turn, then attacks Angel for 5 with Dragon Mage, making each player discard their hands and draw 7 new cards when it deals combat damage. In his second main phase, Lion casts a Felwar Stone and a Victimize, sacrificing Dragon Mage to return Hellkite Tyrant and Chainer Nightmare Adept from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped, also doing 2 damage to Ellis, killing it. At the end of turn, Angel casts Thrill of Possibility, discarding a card to draw 2. In Lunch's upkeep, they draw a card while Lion draws 2. Then Lunch plays a Plaza of Heroes and recasts their commander Jodah, triggering Hero's Blade and attaching it to Jodah, giving him +3/+2. They then attack Angel with Questing Beast and Kari Zev, making a Ragavan token on attacks, so she takes 19 total damage. At the end of turn, Ragavan gets sacrificed, and Angel sacrifices Master of Cruelties with Anji, making each opponent lose 2 life while she gains 2 life. On Angel's turn, she plays a Sulphur Springs, casts a Soul Ring, casts a Change of Fortune, discarding her hand, then drawing cards equal to the cards she's discarded this turn, which is 5, casts Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose, making target opponent lose life equal to any life she gains. This also triggers Anji, making a Blood token. She then moves to combat and attacks Lion for 7 with Anji and Olivia, triggering her commander and returning Malakir Blood Witch to the battlefield tapped and attacking Lunch. When the Blood Witch enters the battlefield, each of Angel's opponents lose life equal to the number of vampires she controls, which is 4, and she gains life equal to the life lost this way, which is 8. This triggers Veto, letting her do 8 damage to Lunch, and finally she's able to sacrifice a blood token to make each opponent lose 2 life while she gains 2, knocking out both opponents and winning Angel the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game, definitely a ton of fun. It was nice to see Captain Rex Nebula do his thing, and it was also kind of cool that we were able to turn Gideon into a creature that was indestructible, and then also a vehicle, and then he also crash landed. So there was a lot happening in that, but it was very, very cool to see. Definitely a lot of shenanigans you don't normally see in a game of Commander. Overall, I think our deck performed very well. I think that we got a little bit unlucky with the fact that we couldn't quite find creatures. We drew quite a few of our vehicles and a decent number of our untap effects, but we couldn't quite find the creatures to make good use of that. We really only had 2 for the vast majority of the game, and that's not where we want to be. So I think in the future, hopefully we'll be able to find more creatures, make good use of our vehicles, but I do think the deck performed well overall. Moving on to Lunchbox and their Jodah deck, this kind of was what I expected, just a bunch of legends, but it was super cool to see the synergies between Jodah getting Planeswalkers. That was something I hadn't really thought of before, so when Lunchbox was able to get Tamiyo into something else, I didn't know that Jodah triggered on Planeswalkers being cast. I don't think Jodah can get Planeswalkers, but I think that Jodah can trigger on them being cast. If I'm wrong, let me know. But it was super cool to see and definitely terrifying. It was very impressive how quickly Jodah grew out of hand, even though Jodah had been killed a couple of times up to that point. Next opponent, let's talk about Lion's deck. Rivaz, also very impressive. I think the reanimation style strategy for dragons was super cool to see, and I think it was very impressive that he was able to get a couple of very key dragons out very, very quickly, and unfortunately hit us with that brutal Hellkite Tyrant, taking away all of our vehicles and kind of setting us back to the Stone Age. So not fun on that turn, but overall very impressive. And then finally, of course, we got to talk about our winner. Angel's deck did very, very well in that game, obviously, as the winner. But you could kind of see the synergies of a lot of the vampires and the blood tokens, being able to continuously make blood tokens with Anji Maid of Dishonor, with the vampires cycling kind of in and out of the graveyard, and the discarding from Anji Falconwrath, and just the reanimation coming in from Olivia, being able to hit Master of Cruelties, which is just an infinite, well, not infinite, I suppose, that's the wrong term. Whatever term I'm thinking of, I'm sure someone will let me know. Just the ability to knock someone out of the game immediately was very, very impressive. This isn't the first time I've lost to Master of Cruelties, and I'm sure it certainly won't be the last. So a lot of fun. I hope you all enjoyed the video. And of course, before we go, I do have one quick mention, because while we were playing this game, we of course turned Gideon into a car that was then a person that crashed, and I don't remember off the top of my head the person who made this phenomenal artwork of that exact scene. On Discord, they're listed only as T. They are in Lion's Discord. If it was you, please do reach out. I would love to give you the proper shout out that you deserve. For some reason, all of the people's names in Discord are showing up with just the first letter. Maybe I missed something, but very cool. And I do want to say, if anyone ever has any memes or pictures or anything that you've made for anything relating to the channel, feel free to send them my way. I will put them in any videos right here at the end, because I do really want to shout out some amazing artists that we have in the community and people who just take their time to honestly just make funny things. I enjoy that. So thank you so much to T, who made this phenomenal piece of art. I genuinely still keep it around because I think it's hilarious. So with all that being said, I hope you all enjoyed the video as much as I did. Hope you enjoyed the game, the deck tech. If you have anything that you would like me to know, whether it's suggestions for future videos or things that happen in the game, put them in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.